Hi, Emily. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to start Hummingbirds, which I think is such a genius idea. But tell everyone what
Thank
it is.
you. Thanks. Yeah. So I live in Des Moines, Iowa, and what I was doing here, I was running a local marketing agency and working with clients who were trying to drive local behavior, right? They're trying to get people to go to their physical therapy clinic, their med spa, their restaurant. And so they really needed these local people to do these local things. And a lot of what I was seeing kind of in the marketing landscape was a lot of traditional options. So think like billboard, TV, print, radio, like great channels, but also like new opportunities. And so I, as a consumer, was thinking, how do I make decisions about like what physical therapy clinic to go to? Oh, I ask my friends. I see what
Yeah.
my friends are talking about on social media, and I'm influenced. And so I had this kind of thesis around, what will influencer marketing look like, or can it look like at a local level, where local people are really amplifying local brands, local events, and experiences to move the needle for these brands. And so I started playing around with it with my local clients in Des Moines. They loved the concept, built some really basic tech, and really had an opportunity to expand across multiple cities in the Midwest by raising venture capital dollars, and kind of taking that startup scale up path. But the core of the business has always been about helping local communities thrive by giving people the opportunity to talk about all the great things happening in their community.
And so the people who become the quote influencers, these are people
Mm-hmm.
like me and you, just like normal people who are maybe not influencers per se on
Yeah.
social media. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of a spin. Like we call them hummingbirds very intentionally in the sense like they're local pollinators. They have a voice and maybe they have 200, 2,000 Instagram followers, but those people are the ones they bump into at the grocery store. Like they actually see at like sand volleyball that would be like, hey, I saw you got a margarita at that new restaurant. Like, was it good? Like, do they make it
Yeah.
spicy? And then you're like, oh my gosh, yes, you need to try the chips and queso. Like, there's no other advertising where you can like create dialogue like that. And so yeah, that's really the focus is like local everyday voices amplifying the things in their own backyard.
Yeah, that's really smart. I feel like the way I found my hairdresser was somebody I followed on Instagram who I don't even know that
Right?
well, but
Yeah.
she provided some services to my kids, and so I was following her,
Yep.
and now I go to her hairdresser, and it's like
Yep.
that's what exactly what you're talking about, like word of mouth
Yep.
marketing for 2024, which means
Yeah.
word of mouth is Instagram or something else like that. That is very,
Exactly.
very cool. I want to, the goal of today's conversation, you obviously have this really interesting career, and I think building a company is not the easiest thing. So before
Yeah.
we get into discussing kind of building a successful career and getting into these specific tips, I want to know, how do you define success as someone who has been, owned a couple of different businesses and continues to work for themselves and doesn't
Yeah.
have necessarily like, a manager being like, this is the metric we have to meet, or this is the thing you have to do. You're really driving your own bus.
Yeah. I think success for me is always about impact. Like, am I impacting the customers I'm serving? Um, what does that look and feel like? Is it different? Is it innovative? Is it disruptive? That to me feels like success can't be the same as what everyone else is doing for me. And then of course, like the ability to create wealth for my family or have stability. And I don't know, I think there's something about autonomy and like the ability to, um, yeah, I have two young kids. Like I want to have that flexibility for myself and my team because I understand how important that is in kind of a post-COVID world. Um, so that's kind of how I look at success. I would say like financial is a huge part of it, but it's also like, do I wake up excited to make an impact with the product we're building?
Mhm. And I feel like what you're talking about is what a lot of people use to define success. Has your definition of success changed over the years? Like you mentioned, now you're an entrepreneur and you have young kids, and like, has that changed from like when you were in your early 20s and maybe doing the corporate thing? And
Yeah, not really, which is kind of cool. I started out right out of college. I did neighborhood revitalization and community development work. So much of like what I started in professionally was all about creating local impact. Look different, right? At like kind of an economic development level. But to me, like I've always wanted to feel like I'm making a difference. I went into PR communications because I knew that I wanted to use my own channel and my own, marketing savvy, if you will, to make an impact for brands. So I never did like the corporate path where I was like, oh, this is not it for me. I've always felt really like it's been really important for me to align with my values, to what I'm creating or what I'm a part of.
Yeah, we talk a lot about that on this show about finding the right fit career and how it all comes
Hmm.
back to values. And I think you're giving us like a very tangible example of like, doesn't matter what I've done, it's always been sort of this local impact. And that's the common theme
Hmm.
that has really like the thread that kind of goes through all of your career experiences, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And it feels
Yeah.
like because you've let that drive you, it's like you are fulfilled in what you're doing, versus
Hmm.
obviously we talk a lot about like what happens when you're not, or you've been working towards something
Yeah.
and you get to that place and it's not what you thought it was going to be, that kind of thing.
Totally. Yep. Yep. And I've experienced those things too in jobs and committees or boards I've been on. And then, you get to make a choice in those moments, right? Do I continue in this and not thrive, or do I peace out and do what does fulfill me and where I can use my zone of genius to really make a difference?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, I think that's why you're the perfect person to talk about things that can influence your career success. And we went
Yeah.
through, there was like three things on the list. So I want to start with talking, kind of diving deeper into each one. So number one on
Yep.
the list is the influence of location for your career success. How has the choice of location really impacted the success of overall your career, but also Hummingbirds and your other career moves?
Yeah. It's foundational for me because so much of what I attribute to any of the company's success I have created is the people I've surrounded myself with, the people who have been willing to grab coffee or do a mentorship program with me or offer resources, offer connections. When I went to college in Des Moines at Drake University, the dean of the business school was like, "I'm going to tell you something. It is not what you know; it's who you know."
Yeah.
And so I spent all of my college career like getting to know people. And I can say for a fact that was the best move versus obsessing over my GPA.
Yes.
And I just have met incredible people in Iowa. I'm more centric in the Des Moines area, but the people who have been so supportive along this path to say, "I love what you're doing. How can I help?" And maybe you can find that other places, but it has been so enriching for me as a business owner, as just a human. And I'm like, I'm here to build business and stay for as long as I can in Iowa.
So obviously Iowa has played a big role in this. What are the specific advantages of growing a business in a state like Iowa? And maybe you don't have another example, but let's
Yeah.
just say Iowa is the pure example here.
Yeah, I think this is all I know. I grew up in a small Dutch town, Pella, like 45 minutes outside of Des Moines. So this is what I know. But as I get to know more founders across the country, I think there's just like there's there's an entrepreneurial energy that has really blossomed over the last 5 years, and maybe that's because I've been like more a part of it than before. But to me, it's that sense of community and pride, and people really advocating for and supporting fellow business owners and entrepreneurs. And you don't have to be like a tech entrepreneur; you can be like the small business owner and be part of chambers that are really active and really supporting one another. And so I mean, it's all I know, it's all I'm used to, but I think that that's been something people have been really delighted in as they move from other states. So I can kind of even say, like, this is what I've noticed my peers from out of state saying and experiencing. So that's been my experience. I wouldn't change that.
What about, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so the natural question
Okay.
that comes to mind is cost of living. And I think about like
Mhm.
Iowa has a lower cost of living than where I live in LA. And so, if I had been a little savvier about starting a business, I might have thought about starting a business in a place that had a more affordable cost of living. Because when you are starting a business or even just growing your career,
Yeah.
like that for your financial success, that's also a big piece of it. So, how does,
Yeah.
having a lower cost of living, for example, in a place like Iowa really contribute to or how has that helped you with building your business and your personal financial health overall?
Yeah. I mean, I could take bigger bets because the financial risk wasn't as high. And so I think for me, it was like, okay, I can get myself X amount of runway because I have lower costs of living here. And I just look at my peers who went to Drake or grew up in Pella who are in other cities and they're like, that's what your mortgage is? Like
Yeah.
that's how much houses are. And I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. I feel like I've been able to make bigger moves too with investing like in a 401k or
Yeah.
programs that support my financial health years to come. And
Yeah.
so I feel like that, I was able to take a little bit of a lower salary than I think most maybe tech CEOs would because it was fine. And so then I could hire more people in my company because salary requirements aren't as high as on the coast. And so there's so many things that we could do inside of our
Yeah.
company and what I can do personally because of that, that I feel so grateful for.
It's interesting. I feel like COVID was really a reckoning for that for so many people where they
Yeah.
were living in these extremely expensive cities. Like
Yeah.
the example I always think of is like San Francisco or New York, where like just to rent an apartment that you share with another person is like $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
And it's like, at
Yeah.
what point do we say, like, this is just not worth it? And I think
Yep.
COVID at least allowed us to say, I can go build a business somewhere else because distributed work is pretty much everywhere. I'm sure you live in Iowa, but you work with people in New York and LA and
Yep.
in Seattle, Miami,
Totally.
whatever. And it doesn't matter, but it matters so much for you on a personal level because it's like,
Yep.
not having to sacrifice owning a home or something like that. I think a lot about that. I actually got advice when I was in college from the Career Center, and they were like, don't go to one of those big major cities right away. Like find a city that is
Yeah.
not going to be through that, like where you're not
Yeah.
giving up so much quality of life in order to work there. And
Hmm.
obviously that didn't work because I ended up in LA, but that's a long
Yeah. I
story.
was like,
But I was from Portland, Oregon, and that was sort of like
okay.
something originally I'd really thought about. And I think it's interesting that like you're basically talking about like the influence of location on your career success does matter. And I think we are seeing people realize that with moving to other places. And
Hmm.
I'm very fascinated by the role that Iowa literally plays in your business, just because you're like,
Right.
sometimes it doesn't matter. And in this an example, it does matter. I just want
Totally.
to I guess one thing I want to talk about before we move on to number two is,
Yeah.
what are some misconceptions about starting a business in Iowa? Like, where you start a business does matter too, by the way, people. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of states that are more friendly to businesses and states that are less friendly. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. I found it very easy to file the LLC and like move towards being a C corporation and like doing all the different types of business moves that we've made. I I don't have it anything to compare it to in terms of like other states, but I will say like we're setting up payroll for other employees in some other states, and like I'm like, whoa, like this is very different or more complex or way more challenging or red tape. So I have found it to just to be easy and supportive. I don't know if there are specific misconceptions. I mean, we're building like an incredible team of Iowans and a distributed team as a startup that maybe you wouldn't normally see in Iowa, and finding a lot of
That's what I
success
was
in terms
thinking.
of culture. Like we're able to do that here. And like it just it makes sense. It works for us. I mean, you're gonna get all 4 seasons here, so you get experience all of like. I'm like literally recording this is like basically there's a blizzard outside, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad Wi-Fi is working today. But I don't know. I think sometimes you're like, oh, I want to be in like the tech scene, and I want to be in the know, but you can do so much of that now digitally. I think about all the
Yeah.
connections that I've made on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm like, it's doable anywhere. So why not
Yeah.
here?
My immediate misconception, again, from a recruiting background, someone might be like, oh, but there
Hmm.
isn't talent in Iowa like there is in these
Yeah.
other cities. And I think that you're completely debunking that. And it's just simply not true in today's world. It's like,
Yeah. Oh,
actually,
for sure.
maybe 30 years ago, that was different if everybody was consolidated somewhere else. But we've already talked about the
Yeah.
COVID thing. Like, I think that
Yeah.
matters a lot. I want to
Yeah.
move into your second tip of things that can influence your
Cool.
career success, and that's the power of networking. So you already talked about this a
Hmm.
little bit with what you learned in
Yeah.
college, but what strategies do you recommend for effective networking? Any hacks or tips that you can share?
Hmm. I think networking is such an art and science. I built like a very large women's networking group. And so it's fascinating to look at like the behavior of individuals who created success as being members of that organization. And then the ones that were like, well, I'm not getting any value out of this. I'm like, well, okay, obviously. So I would say, the people who show up and are like there to just push out business cards and talk about themselves are going to get the value of a networking group. The people who I think really lead with value and curiosity. Hey, what do you do in the world? Like, what do you care about? What lights you up? And like, be curious and don't talk about yourself unless it's like an organic part of the conversation. I think those people win in life and business. A lot of my ideology is rooted in the book The Go Giver. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book or
No.
know of it, but it's just this it's the shortest little book I've read. But it was like, oh my gosh, this encapsulates like the way I think about life. It's like giving more value than you receive in payment, like not asking for anything from people, but just giving, being like super generous. And that doesn't mean you're just like writing checks or whatever to all these like nonprofit organizations and things like that. But it's like, hey, is there like, what would help you get to the next step in your business? And someone's like, well, I need really looking for 5 new people, new customers who can do this. It's like, oh, I have a friend who
Hmm.
was just talking about this. Can I make an introduction? I mean, you can imagine like reciprocity like starts to happen the more you give. People want to reciprocate. And so for me, when I think about networking, it's all about that, like adding value, not expecting anything, but showing up and saying like, I want to help you. How can I help?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a memorable moment where, or a memorable networking experience that positively impacted your business that you could share?
I would say, I think about one of my closest friends, Whitney, who is a photographer in Des Moines. And I think about, we're really close friends now. So it's fun to like look back like 3, 4 years when we first met. But I look at when she joined FemCity, the group I was running, and brand new to making connections. And I made a point to be like, here are 3 people you need to know. And I can look now at all of the photographs of the families she's taken with those individuals and like her career growth because these people she photographed and introduced her to these people she photographed. Like I see that like spiderweb impact of like what has happened because of a few key introductions. And so that feels really tangible to me. And like other people have done the exact same for me. And so I just like when I can sit back and really appreciate and look at the full picture, I'm like, wow, those like 2 or 3 introductions from 2018
Yeah.
led to this. It's
Yeah,
really
that is cool.
powerful.
It's
Hmm.
interesting. You're talking about local events and the positive influence they've had. You obviously created like a local networking group. I
Hmm.
think a lot of people think of networking and get very nervous about attending events because they're not sure. Like you walk into a room and you don't know anybody.
Hmm.
Can you talk about local events? Maybe debunk maybe the myths that we have in our head about them, and why are they a good thing to join when you are trying
Hmm.
to build your career?
Yeah. I mean, it's scary going anywhere new. Like, let's be honest, I'm usually like, just do I have a friend that wants to go with me? I don't like
Yeah.
necessarily like showing up alone places either. So I don't think it's like uncommon and it's like, get over it. Like, there is like a anxiousness, like sometimes I still feel today where I'm like, okay, I don't know anyone in this room, but I think that's an opportunity to be like, again, curious, like, who's here? What do they care about? What can I ask them? What can I learn from this opportunity? And, sometimes it does require like popping into a pod of 3 people who are in a circle together to be like, hey, um, people usually they are all there to network. So it's not like anyone's gonna be like, what are you doing here? It's like that's the point, to like interject, to be part of it, to be a friendly face. Sometimes I think the people who were involved in Fem City who got the most out of it volunteered to be a greeter. So you feel like you have a role, but
Yeah.
you're like filling out the name tags, you're welcoming people, you're showing them where the coffee is. And so you feel like you can still network, but you almost feel like you have a role as well that I don't know, it makes it easier. So
Oh,
maybe
I absolutely
volunteer to be like,
understand this. Yeah. You're like, give me a job so I don't just like stand around with nothing to
yes,
do. I
yep.
totally get that. Do you think local events in Des Moines, and again, maybe you don't have much of a comparison, but like I think of going to local events in LA and I'm like, it is too big, too
Mm,
broad. Like there's that fear of like, is this going to be a complete waste of my time? But I feel like in Des Moines, local events seem to be very successful and something that actually people
mhm,
really are involved in. Have you experienced that as well?
mhm. Yeah, I think Des Moines is it's a smaller city, so it's easy to get from like suburb to suburb. It's like 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here.
Mhm.
So you're not, you can go to a totally new Chamber of Commerce event, you can go to a young professionals event, like a downtown networking thing, and meet a whole bunch of different people um, that are maybe focused on different things, or they just like they work downtown, so they tend
Yeah.
those types of things, or they identify as young professionals. So I do think, and it continues to grow, just the diversity of the groups and what
Yeah.
people care about. And that's been really exciting to see grow because when I started Fem City Des Moines, I mean, there's always been a really solid chamber approach in the community, but there was nothing that was really focused on these like younger women kicking off their careers in Des Moines for Des Moines. And so I was like, how do we get more of these kind of like
Yeah.
niche groups created for different types of people creating things?
Yeah, and there's something that seems less intimidating about it like that. Like you're kind of beginning at the ground level versus when you go again, this
Yeah.
was the advice I got was like, don't launch your career in like one of these bigger cities, like they'll eat you
Mm.
alive. Like that was sort of
Yeah.
that was the
No.
message without being that being the message. But I
Yeah.
understand, the joke about like if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And you're like, I don't know if that's a
Mm.
good thing, but like
Yeah.
I understand that. And it's interesting because there are times where you're like, again, you're like, I would like to go somewhere and be able to build community and have belonging. And that can be much harder in very large cities. And it's just like the
Mm.
fact that you've talked so much about local events. I'm like, I live in a huge city. No one ever talks about local
Yeah.
events because
Oh,
it's not as
interesting.
much a thing here. But so
Yeah.
that's interesting too. Okay, so the third
Yeah.
thing that can influence
Yeah.
your career success, you talked about purpose and its role overall. And I'm just curious, like you obviously talked about the purpose that kind of is the foundation to all the things you've done, which is that local impact. I'm curious, in what ways does having a strong sense of purpose, which it sounds like you have, influence your career decisions and success overall?
Hmm. I mean, it's everything to me because it's what motivates me to get to work, to make a difference, to stay up later on some nights when I'm like, I'm really tired from my 1 year old who's, cutting teeth. So for me, purpose is like it has to be there or it's not interesting to me, period. And I think from that perspective, it's really allowed us as a team, a leadership team at Hummingbirds, to say this is the culture, these are the values. Like we want you to have a sense of purpose when you show up. And if you don't, we need to talk about it and like help you get there. Or maybe like Hummingbirds isn't the fit for you, which is also
Yeah.
okay. And so it drives everything impact, purpose, alignment. I think that is just key and really holding on to that in an authentic way. Because I think it really sets companies apart too.
Yeah, absolutely. We had someone come on the show, and she had done some research on it. And according to the science and the research, the three drivers behind happiness at work were autonomy, purpose, and relationships, which is sort of interesting
Hmm.
because in a way
Yeah.
we're essentially saying all that. I mean, we talked about location, but location also could lead into that autonomy play, piece of it too. But
Yep.
it's interesting because she had said purpose and very much like having values in line. I'm curious what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs who are maybe struggling to find their purpose? I think you are so clear on it, but sometimes I feel like
Hmm.
when you're an entrepreneur, you can start really clear with a purpose. That maybe is why you get into it. But as you know, things change and people have so
Hmm.
much feedback for you along the way. How do you like what advice would you give to entrepreneurs or even people in their career who are struggling to find their purpose right now?
Yeah. I think sometimes it does just require us to really step back and like sit with ourselves or help get work with someone. Maybe it's a close friend or an old employer or something that can help you really clarify. Because I totally get it. You get kind of in the grind and you're like, okay, yep, like I built this product, but now this product looks like this and it's for this customer. I didn't quite know. I don't know how we got there, but we're here. Um, and for some people, it means like scrapping the whole thing and being like, I'm not doing this if it doesn't align with what I set out to do. And other people, really find a way to be like, okay, this is the core audience I actually want to talk to. So I'm going to make the hard choice of changing my messaging, relinquishing like some of these client relationships. And it is really hard, but I think it just, instead of just pushing and pushing and like trying to get to success financially, like if you're not feeling fulfilled, like there's like a trickle effect of like maybe some like health issues or challenges that you could face and like don't get there if you don't have to.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard because I'm sure it's case by case. Every personality and person's different, but I think like it's getting reflective and getting curious about, well, why isn't this creating purpose when it used to? Or
Mhm.
why are things this way?
Okay, I want to ask you another tough question related to purpose
Yeah.
because as a small business owner, and maybe anybody who's listening to this, who's a business owner or a manager of a team can maybe relate to this. How does purpose influence your company culture and employee engagement? We're seeing all these reports right now about how employee engagement is the lowest it's ever been. And I know
Hmm.
you have a small startup, so that might be not your
Hmm.
huge challenge because you don't have
Hmm.
3,000 people in your company. But overall, when you are running a startup, every body counts literally
Oh
and
yeah.
it's so important. So how do you infuse that purpose into the culture and the engagement for your team?
We've done a few tactical things. We try to be really intentional about content we reshare. So the whole point of Hummingbirds is like get out into your community and experience brands in your own backyard, share it on social. So when we see really great content from our hummingbirds, we put that in our Slack channel. Be like, look what people are doing. Wow, like look how much of a difference this makes for our clients. So it's showing, visualizing like you might be selling packages as a salesperson, but like look what the client is now experiencing for themselves. We also have a Slack channel called Wins. And so every Friday or Monday, depending on people's remembering to do it, which is mostly me, we post like a win or multiple wins we've had in our personal life or like in business too. And I think that it it helps people get to know each other. It also just lets us celebrate one another on a really consistent basis. And so when we think about engagement, like we just put out an employee survey and like the engagement was incredibly high. There are, of course, areas that we get to lean into and grow, but I do think like we really try and like our weekly meetings with teammates to be like, okay, yes, are you hitting your goals? Are we focused on these KPIs? Are we hitting our numbers? But how are you doing? Like, any way we can help you make this more efficient, make it more effective, like bring more joy into it. And I think like having that relationship with your employees is part of that. Like just you were saying, relationships. Like when you care about someone, like that builds like a lot of stickiness, that emotional Velcro that I think employees are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, emotional Velcro is such a good term for it.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. I was thinking about how like early stage startup companies in major cities, sometimes it's the stereotype is you work 100 hours a week and you're basically married to your job, and that we
Mhm.
are not seeing that. Like we are seeing
Yeah.
much more people say work-life balance is important to me. How does hummingbirds and specifically having a business in Iowa kind of mix in with that work-life balance? How, I mean, does
Mhm.
the Iowa piece play a role of it? I mean, I'm not really sure, but like tell me a little bit about what that looks like for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely like you have to work hard. Like we're definitely hard workers on our team and we put in the time. But like on the weekends, there's no expectation to be online or on Slack and like collaborating in any way. And we set that, I made that really clear in the beginning. When we first started hiring people, I was like 8 months, 9 months pregnant. I'm like, look, like you're going to get a lot of me, but you're not going to get like a big chunk of my time over the next several months as I do this whole mom thing again. And so I think it's just being really intentional with teammates of like, these are the boundaries you get to create. And like, these are the boundaries that I have that like, you're not going to impress me if you email me at 5 a.m. You're not going to
Yeah,
impress me or the team if you're working at 9 p.m. If you want
yeah,
to, cool, do it. So I would say that is a company thing, but I also think there are a lot of people like I'll go get happy hour with at 4:30 that are signing off work and there's not like pressure to stay late and feel bad is what I've noticed across like a lot of peers and friends at a lot of different companies in Iowa. And so that's really nice because that
yeah.
hustle culture just can really, really cause burnout. So
It's
we don't need
it's the
that.
hustle culture and sort of, and again, I can speak to this being living in LA. It's the feeling of like there's always more to do, and like someone's
Mm-hmm.
like the keeping up with the Joneses vibe, like that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's an exhausting thing, and I think we're everybody is moving toward an anti-hustle culture, and I think it's
Yeah.
amazing that you are setting the example, because one of the worst things is this bait and switch thing when a manager will say, no, I don't want you emailing at 5 a.m., but the person who emails at 5
Yeah.
a.m. gets rewarded for it, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like actions
Yep.
speak louder than words. um,
Yeah. Yep.
well, these are all incredible tips and reminders of things that can
Cool.
influence your career success. So just to recap, everybody, you know, considering your location and where you want to build your career, the power of networking, and then purpose. And Emily, I love your example of just you're so crystal clear on your purpose. And I think that's really nice to see, because one of the most challenging things I think sometimes is the tell me about yourself. It's, you
Yeah.
know, what's your why, what's your impact? And it's great to
Mm-hmm.
see, like you're saying, like it doesn't necessarily matter where I go, but this is the impact I have, and or like
Yeah.
the theme. And I love that. I think that's a good real example. Emily, tell everyone where they can learn more about you and hummingbirds, which is such a cool concept.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Thank
give them
you.
all the links.
Yeah, so I'm active as like a human, Emily Steele, but like person of hummingbirds on Instagram. I'm just Emily.Steele. If you want to learn more about hummingbirds, our website's the best. It's www.hummingbirds.com. We're also very active in every city we're in on Instagram as well. So if you're in one of our communities and want to be part of like what we're building as a brand or as a hummingbird, we would love to chat with you. Thanks for
Yeah,
your time today.
it's such a cool concept. So anyone who go
Thanks.
on their website, check out their cities, and if you are the person who loves getting recommendations, this reminds me of like I'm in like a mom group chat, and oh my
Yes.
God, if you need something figured out, be in a
Uh-huh.
mom group chat. They know, they've done their research, and they will
Yep.
respond in 2 seconds. No, it's amazing. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.